Finally, it is here. I know I haven't uploaded in a while, but that's because I have been putting in months of hard work, reading and religiously analysing Isayama's ending for Attack on Titan so that I can be as fair, honest and accurate as possible in this video. In fact, the significant time since my last upload has afforded me the luxury to digest everything that has been said, and as we all know, much has been said. To those who don't have an open mind, reaffirming your beliefs in a circle of similar views, whether that is the ending is good or bad, then this video may not be for you. Since I ultimately like the ending, but also understand it has flaws and is far from perfect. I know some may be shocked, even spam the dislike button, as I'm not filled with the burning rage some may have. And that itself is another factor as to why this video is so late. I held it back in fear that something I poured so many hours into would be unfairly dismissed. But hey, you're finally watching this video, so I got over it. Therefore, without any further delays, let's begin a colossal review of Attack on Titan's ending. First and foremost, Eren Yeager, as not only is he the main protagonist of the story, but also the person at the heart of the controversy. Some claim the final chapter misunderstands him, as he does things he would apparently never do. The infamous panel of him crying is a great example of this, as some claim he is far too emotional. Few even suggest he has never been such a character. And so before tackling anything else, let's first see if Eren Yeager has ever been an emotional character, and did that change? Going to the very start of Attack on Titan, you'll instantly find some answers, because if you remember, who is the only character that is presented with larger-than-life dreams, universally labelled edgy by the fans, and told he is far too emotional? Eren. This isn't a gotcha moment, it simply is what it is. And no, I don't mean the crybaby way many assume with the word emotional. It's important to understand that being an emotional person is simply feeling more deeply than others, as you're frequently cranked up to 100, and so may shift to the extremes, whether that be crying or getting angry. With that knowledge, Eren is most definitely an emotional character, at least before joining the Scouts. His mother, a person who would know him better than any of us at the beginning, labels him foolhardy. The word means to be bold and rash. It instantly has a connection to someone who cannot control their actions due to their emotions getting the better of them. Similarly, Harness tells Armin and Mikasa that he remembers the times when they were little, where Eren would always run into fights, regardless if he could win them or not. So, the story establishes he is an extremely emotional character at the beginning, and that's why the Titan eating his mother is an even greater recipe for disaster, as the gasoline of emotions already brewing inside of him ignite, creating uncontrollable explosive bursts of anger and an undying will to pursue a goal that borders on psychotic. Of course, that goal was to kill all the Titans. Isayama is not subtle about his burning hate for the man-eating monsters. Interestingly though, the increasing emotional drive towards his desires helps make him similar to many shonen peers, where they have an iron will, inhumane amounts of determination and resolve. In these kind of stories, they're usually, with the odd exception, portrayed as good things, something that makes you stand by the character and root for them instead of challenge them. However, the big difference with Isayama planting these shonen aspects in Eren is the world and every character around him. Attack on Titan is dark, complex, and bleak. You don't get called a cruel world for no reason. Nothing is black and white. The world can sometimes mirror the same nuance and muddiness you find in real life. For these reasons, Eren's shonen design, of which typically embodies the character having simplistic views they feel strongly about, is out of place, and thus, his mindset and emotional resolve comes across dangerous. Some may say, how does him having a goal he feels deeply about, even if it's a dangerous view to have, make him an emotional character? Well, just think about it. In order to feel deeply about something to the point it's so twisted, you have to at least have an emotional attachment. Also, in Eren's case, his burning desire to chase freedom and to kill all the Titans is not normal. Not because he hates the Titans or because he wants to be free, everyone feels that way. But it's how he expresses those desires, with the deepest of investment, birthing anger and hate, leading to some to call him a monster. Furthermore, the emotional side of his character is also present with his actions, since he constantly shouts, overreacts, and butts heads with other characters. Conveniently, he is also the one character that breaks into regular vicious fits of rage, which is a byproduct of getting so emotional that your body submits to its primal instincts. Regardless, I could be here all day, so in the face of overwhelming evidence, I'm going to cut to the chase. You could say Eren is the most emotional character in all of Attack on Titan. However, some may say, what about when he learns the truth? He changes. In that case, you're kind of right. The truth I'm talking about is when he learns his father killed the royal family and stole the powers which made him believe he was special. From this moment onwards, he begins to self-loathe as he feels unsure about himself, so retreats into a shell. This change is made that more obvious with Jan not getting any fiery emotional comebacks from Eren. However, with all that being said, this period only lasts for a short while, as Keith Shadis informs Eren he was always special from his mother's perspective, since he was born into this world. From there, he begins to find his will again, and so the next time Jan pokes fun at him, he retorts back with his firework of emotions. Also, note how Mikasa, someone who is always overprotective over Eren, doesn't stop the scuffle like she usually does. It's because she has missed Eren being Eren. This defines an aspect of his personality, a core of his character. Whenever he has returned, it's done in a way that highlights his childlike inability to control his emotions. That's a vital factor to acknowledge and not overlook. Despite that though, he does in fact slightly change. Now instead of believing he alone is able to change the world, he understands that he has to work with his comrades. He is also more wary and doubtful, as he's still not 100% assured in himself nor his worldview. One of the possible reasons for that is because he believes he will no longer be the person to save the world. Which brings me to the next critical junction, when this piece of information is actually expressed by Eren. Fighting for Armin's life, he opens the closet as to how he truly feels. He makes it obvious to the reader that yes, I was an emotional character, and I still am, as he confesses he lost sight of the dream Armin saw, as he mainly felt hate for the Titans. That's a strong word. The emotions required to feel that way are incredibly powerful, especially to feed it as long as he has. This explains why he would say the freakiest of things and would always snap at people, as he was constantly feeling emotions that would have him on edge. More importantly though, his rose-tinted view of humanity shatters when he learns the truth about the world on that day. Up until this point in the story, he has slowly started to acknowledge the cruelty of Attack on Titan's world. But one constant that remains unchanged is his view that humanity is not the main enemy. This simplistic black and white mindset is exposed for its flaws, as the Titans are revealed to not be the enemy, but victims to humanity. This breaks him, and a great moment that illustrates his inability to adhere to his previous ideology is the moment before he kisses Historia's hand. Talking to Armin, Eren sounds like his usual self, seemingly unaffected from the truth, as he is extremely hopeful about seeing the ocean. He believes humanity seeing the sea is not just the wondrous sight Armin views it as, but a mark of their freedom, and humanity's victory from its enemies. Yet, as he passionately speaks, he hesitates, as he remembers that's not true. The reality and realization that hits him in that moment is played out when the scouts see the ocean for the first time. Briefly, the sight of the sea does bring joy for everyone, especially Armin, but then Eren is quick to remind them that this sea means the exact opposite of victory. For him, he doesn't view it as representing the freedom he believed it would, nor them overcoming their enemies. Instead, it's an earth-shattering reminder that they're not free, as their real enemies are across the sea. From this point on, Eren comes across dejected and less explosive than he was in the past. However, that doesn't mean he's no longer an emotional character. In fact, him being able to feel extremely down is proof of that. To fall as low as he does, you would have to first feel deeply about something in order to be this disappointed. It's a reoccurring image in Attack on Titan. Those who invest significant emotion into ideas, especially idealistic ones, tend to veer down a path of intense suffering. For example, Shadis is revealed to be somewhat similar to Eren, in that he believed he was special until the world beat him again and again into a bitter, loathing man. While this reality of the world deals a massive blow to Eren's ideals, he still has his friends and the island, something he remains highly emotional about. When Historia is threatened to be used in Zeke's secret plan, he is disgusted and flat out refuses. Another moment that shows his deeper bond with his friends is when they're building the roads, as he confesses he loves them and that he doesn't want them to die, just for them to live long, happy lives. Also, that's not to say there isn't a big change in Eren, as there eventually is, and every one of the characters in the story recognize it. From the Liberia invasion onwards, he comes across emotionless, untroubled by the fact he massacred civilians, put his friends in danger, one of them being Historia, who he felt strongly against using, but now seemingly doesn't give a damn. This is what it looks like to have a character who doesn't have strong emotions. Consequently, he is at complete odds with his previous self, even contradicting past statements, but somehow Isayama makes it believable. This is because he has always been flawed. He had a dangerous, naive view of the world which has hit him with blow after blow, so it would come as no surprise to see him become the monster he now acts like. But that's it, he's acting. This is all a ruse and facade, not just to trick the people, but to also help himself. In order for Eren to commit to the rumbling, he is distancing himself from his friends so they won't struggle to kill him. And as messed up as it is, his planned mass murder of innocent people will be easier to swallow if he tries to cut off his emotions. Although we know that doesn't really work out since he occasionally snaps out of his cold exterior. Instead of remaining calm when talking to Hanji, he gets angry. He shows his emotions because of course, he actually cares. This is a crack in his facade and is a direct parallel to this comment in the story when Hanji previously teased him and got a harmless retort. Now though, she gets a menacing face-to-face with someone on edge. For all these reasons, we don't see what some have labelled an out-of-character moment when Eren is pathetically emotional about his death in chapter 139, as he has always been this person, but has only suppressed it to pursue this path. What we're actually seeing is the veil being removed, revealing nothing but a terrified boy. It's akin to the Wizard of Oz situation, but far more tragic. The man behind this massacre isn't the monster we have built him up, but the boy we started this story with, who has fallen victim to the world's numerous themes. Then again, some people may say if Eren was always an emotional character, of which there's mountain of evidence for by the way, why did he not show any of it from the Liberia invasion onwards and then did so suddenly, especially when he already saw the future and knew what would happen? Well, this is missing some vital information, one being the important context before the Liberia arc, as we do see he is in fact at odds with what he sees in the future. Exploring the outside world, he unlike everyone else is distant and unhappy. Eventually we see him break down, buckling under the intense guilt and emotions he feels from what he does in the future. But after this moment, he becomes the man that must move forward. Eren is still struggling, but is composing himself in the Liberia arc onwards, as I will repeat it, has to move forward, has to fight. He conveniently says those very words again and again, turning it into a mantra. It's not just a cool thing to say, since it is also critical for Eren to remind himself there are bigger things to do before dealing with his own emotion. When everything is done and there's nothing for him to do, he has no choice but to then reflect on what's happened. This leads to a massive outburst of emotions which he has been burying, and it doesn't help that he's being provoked by Armin. I'm sure someone may still be typing, but Eren knew what would happen, so why is he so emotional now? Whilst this is true, it is also incredibly fickle and shallow, as everyone should naturally know, seeing the future and acting it out are two very different things. How can you even expect him to have internalized, fully grasped the emotional pain and suffering that comes with his actions in the future? It's also important to have a bit of perspective. Eren is only 19. There's a lot of baggage he has to deal with, including the fact he is dying, never going to be able to see the people he loves, and most of all, the woman he loves, whom he possibly never confessed his feelings to. So yeah, I'm pretty certain he's allowed to have a mental breakdown. Oh, and by the way, this scene is supposed to be pathetic. It's supposed to be odd and seemingly out of the cold, emotionless character Eren has built himself to be. And you know how I know this? Because Armin himself is also presented to be shocked by his outburst. And yet, others have chosen another word for Eren. Instead of acknowledging the 139 chapters of deep, complex, nuanced character writing, they have labelled him as simp. Specifically because he gets so emotional about Mikasa, which is a monumental factor that I haven't dived into yet, until now. The complaints in this area range from compelling to downright ridiculous shippers who believe certain characters should be romantically involved with others. But focusing on the former, for my sanity and yours, more reasonable people will say no love connection between Eren and Mikasa was ever apparent, and that he most certainly didn't love her. To be frank, before reading the manga, I always believed the two would be a thing, more so when it would happen rather than if it would happen. From my deep dive, I found why I felt this way, as there's constant depictions of Eren only blushing around Mikasa, the seconds together before the Smiling Titan is about to kill them, and his question to her before Liberia. Eren's feelings towards Mikasa even get extremely overt at times. In chapter 108, we get to see inside his mind through the memory shards, which there is no way to manipulate. And who do we see as the largest figure at the center? Mikasa. She is literally at the center of everything. And for those who say this doesn't prove a love connection, as she could be the most important person because of a family role, well then, wouldn't his mother be the main person at the center if that was the case? Instantly, that idea is thrown out the window, and so putting all the clues together, connecting the dots, this suggests Mikasa is special to him not because of a family role, but possibly more as a lover. The naysayers will now possibly insist that if Eren did love Mikasa, it was never a big factor within the story, and to be honest, I can sympathize with that, as I would have completely agreed. But then I noticed again, and again, and again, how their bond has been tied to absolutely pivotal moments within the story. Whenever reaching critical junctions, from Eren awakening his founding ability to him proceeding towards the rumbling, it has had a moment between the pair which could have altered the course of the story. This cannot be by no mere coincidence, and even if it is, it doesn't really matter, as it's clear as day that the relationship between them is linked to some of the most essential moments, thus elevating the significance of the relationship. Either way, anyone can notice that they both never truly developed a romantic connection past a few hints, which I'm certain is by purpose, and if not, Isayama got damn lucky that it fits so well. Let me explain. To those who complain Isayama didn't spend time developing the relationship between Eren and Mikasa, well, I believe that's precisely the point, the tragedy of this love dynamic, and a reason why Eren's feelings explode as they never said what they felt. This is perfectly in keeping with how the theme of love is represented in Attack on Titan. Yes, you heard that right, love is a theme that is present within this dark dystopian fantasy. However, not in the traditional way, as it's a theme in the story not for its developments, rather its lack of it. Remember that the reoccurring absence and underdevelopment of something within a story will then become a theme on its own, as it's an established message and meaning from the writer, whether they meant it or not. So, when Isayama frequently chooses to leave love both sparsely represented and developed in the story, it becomes a message that it exists within this world, but remains undeveloped for our characters as their priority is to push towards more important goals. If you think I'm reaching and being far too generous, then prepare to be surprised, as majority of the time, this has been the case. Erwin Smith, the 13th commander of the Scouts, is an ambitious man who doesn't have anything to do with love, or at least that was the case until Isayama chose to add this dialogue interaction in chapter 53. Erwin suddenly admits to Nao he may have loved his wife at one point, but never pursued her due to his ambitions and goals getting in the way. Similarly, Keith Shardis loved Eren's mother, but never expressed his interest as he was committed to the military, believing he was destined for something special. Marlowe, a hopeless romantic, doesn't realize his love for Hitch until it's too late. He was so consumed by his ambitions that he was blinded to his own heart. Sasha and Nicolo both love each other, but that never came to be due to the world of Attack on Titan literally preventing it through the cycle of violence. Historia and Ymir also both clearly love each other, yet that doesn't happen because the world wants to punish Ymir, whilst Historia is far too important to the military. And this goes on and on, from Raina, Krista, Annie, Bertolt. Love is something that is there, it is clearly present, but for those who are involved within the story, specifically moving it forward, will leave it to the side, undeveloped, and thus fall victim to the devastating theme of love. Many have correctly said Attack on Titan is too dark, complex, and nuanced for a traditional love story. And that's precisely why this cruel interpretation of the theme that relates back to the world is either pure genius by Isayama or absolute dumb luck. Unfortunately, people will still refuse to believe this and will dig through interviews to suggest Isayama is retconning himself. More precisely, I'm speaking about an early interview with him, which is being used by a loud minority as they manipulate his words against him. They allege that he suddenly changed the relationship dynamic between Eren and Mikasa from a family one to a romantic one. Whilst this is true to some extent, Isayama also stated he hadn't stopped developing. This means he may have felt one way about her, which could then possibly change. That's why it's also vital to consider the time of the interview, as Isayama was mainly speaking with the knowledge of what was public. These people are disregarding that fact, and that is important to consider as the actual reveal of Mikasa and Eren's feelings is a pretty big plot point. If Isayama was to reveal what she actually means to Eren, he'd have spoiled the ending, as it would have told us before it is revealed that his behaviour and actions were a lie, as he didn't actually hate her, leading to a domino effect of uncovering what else is genuine and not. Now, what about Eren's actions and plan? For this, it's important to address the revelation that he actually causes his mother's death. The obvious result is that it functions as the trigger for his psychotic will and determination to achieve his goal of eradicating the Titans, grasping freedom and saving his friends. One effect though of this revelation is that some people question whether Eren has always pretended to be angry about his mother's death. They claim it makes no sense why he was so angry at Reiner and Bertolt for their initially thought involvement, as it was actually his fault. To plainly answer this, he wasn't aware until the day he kissed Astoria's hand. What he felt and chose to do before that point was real and all him. Sure, he may have been pushed down this path, but he still ultimately made the decisions, or at least that's up for you to decide as the reader. Isayama actually lays some clues of when Eren becomes aware of his involvement with his own life, since we see his demeanour completely change as he knows the truth. We also see additional clues such as him no longer blaming Reiner, and that's a drastic change from this to now all of a sudden not condemning him. Plus, he obviously doesn't tell Reiner about this factor as that would reveal too much, so he keeps face. Other hints can even be as subtle as the coincidental scratch of his chin, which is a universally understood suggestion that someone is lying. A more concerning byproduct though of Eren killing his mother to initiate this path and plan is that some say the plan itself is stupid. This is mainly because if he wants to help his people, why didn't he just leave Dina to eat Bertolt instead of his mother? If that happened, she would have inherited the Colossal Titan and the ability to shift back to human form, ultimately being able to use the power of the Founder when she would meet Grisha. This surely would have meant the Eldians in Paradise could protect themselves, even eliminate others if they wanted it to be so. And you know what? That would all be warranted, a genuine alternative and criticism of Eren's plan if it wasn't for the fact this whole proposal misses huge points. One being that Eren would have never inherited the Founding Titan in that timeline. Thus, he could never influence Grisha in the past to get the Founder, meaning he would not have possession of it. We saw back in chapter 121 that it wasn't actually Grisha who chose to murder the royal family to get the Founder, but Eren from the future who manipulates his father into taking the founding ability. However, if he never got the power, he would have never been able to interfere with the past, which was the critical junction as to how Grisha got the ability to then pass it to Eren. It is the simple basic understanding of time. When you change one little microscopic detail, it can have a massive ripple effect to the point that the story that would have unfolded is unknown. So unfortunately, from what we know, Eren's mother had to die in order for him to birth a psychotic determination which helps him pursue the path that, from his view, leads to the success of his goals, freedom for his people, the eradication of the Titans, and the security of his friends living long happy lives. Funny enough though, some will go as far to say Eren wouldn't pursue this plan as he never really cared about wanting his people and friends to live long happy lives. He'd rather pursue freedom above anything else. Whilst it's true he's always wanted freedom, he has also equally wanted those he formed bonds with to live long happy lives and to rid the world of Titans. In some aspect, it can be argued that for him, he initially believes his route to freedom is dependent upon eradicating the Titans, and once he even learns the truth about them, he still feels that they have to be gone for the Eldians to feel free from the curse and the world to be rid of the fear they bring. This means the need to get rid of the Titans is a constant and overlaps with Eren's desire of freedom. Also, a fantastic insight about his other goal to save his friends is seen in chapter 89. We see Gruger, the attack titan, say to Grisha that he must save Armin and Mikasa. At the moment this happened, everyone was scratching their heads, as Armin and Mikasa are Eren's friends and weren't even born yet. However, with new information from later chapters, we know that the reason for this peculiar moment is because Gruger is tapping into future memories of Eren, which is conveniently focusing on securing the safety of his two friends. One of the reasons he wants to save them, besides their bond, is reviewed a few chapters back. Eren confesses that he believes Armin is the one who will save the world, not him, nor anyone else. In chapter 139, we see this idea is honoured as he bestows the responsibility upon Armin to create peace. Therefore, this isn't an idea out of the blue, as it was hinted as far back as chapter 84. And if we're being honest, it's been shown again and again that Armin is the most likely person to save the world. Erwin in chapter 74 outright says that he is one of humanity's greatest weapons, and he's not wrong. It has been Armin that solves and provides solutions to pretty much everything. Irrespective of that, I have to emphasize, Eren isn't a checkbox. He doesn't have one goal or dream. He initially begins with his goals of freedom and ridding the world of Titans, which starts to grow to multiple desires, including yet again, both his friends to live long happy lives and his people to be free. I know there will be people still moaning, probably pushing the narrative that Eren's plan is not perfect itself. To that, I'll say this. I'm not saying Eren's plan is the best, but heck, stop treating him like he's omnipotent. He's never ever been the smartest character in the series or presented the plans. More so the opposite. His plan may be imperfect, but that's why it makes perfect sense for him to follow, because Eren himself is an extremely flawed character. A good example of the latter is his basic view of the world, which highlights a sinister aspect to his character. Whenever his view of the world would be challenged, he would reinterpret it into his flawed ideology until it fit. This is first brought to the forefront on the night he and Mikasa murdered the kidnappers. Yes, it was self-defense. That's not the problem. Rather his behavior, his choice of words during and after the traumatic experience. He makes it clear he views the world through two shades, good and bad. Humans the former, whilst Titans are the latter, as they're monsters, wild animals that need to be put down. This flawed thinking allows him to find ways to justify his violence, and so in that moment, he doesn't hesitate when killing the kidnappers, since in his mind, he defines them as animals, not humans. This all feeds into what he says. It is only natural that he should kill them. This is what should happen to you, as he stabs them repeatedly. This makes it simple to conclude that Eren is flawed beyond belief. This way of questioning humans' humanity when he deems them bad is a frequent reoccurrence. Don't ever forget that Reiner interaction in the forest. And so these examples that show Eren redefines someone by calling into question their humanity is a solid example of him willing to believe in something, even if it is flawed. He essentially has a confirmation bias, as he's already made up his mind, and any facts that may challenge him are either brushed to the side or altered until it fits his broken belief. And isn't that a convenient example of life imitating art? How many Attack on Titan videos or threads have you seen where someone has made a conclusion that shoehorns ideas that fit that belief, whilst disregarding those that conflict, or at times entirely redefine them through mental gymnastics? To ensure I avoided such pitfalls, I approached the analysis of this video with the facts first and conclusions later, whereas others do the reverse, which intentionally or not leads them to find ways to support said conclusion. I've just realised I've gone off on a tangent, so back at the topic at hand, as another reason why it is appropriate for Eren to choose this bloody path, is that this violence has been continuously written in his character. He is the one who again and again abandons his humanity with disturbing violence to solve problems. When fighting Annie, he levels the city, killing many civilians. Out of context, it even looks like he is the bad guy in the situation. One could even say, for all his brilliance and good intentions, that Armin doesn't help Eren's flawed mentality and actually feeds into his worst instincts. This is because he is the one who says that no one has ever achieved anything without sacrifice. To defeat and overcome their enemies, we may have to abandon what makes us good. And so each time Eren follows Armin's advice, he abandons his humanity again and again to move humanity forward, meaning it will become more likely that he will develop into the man that will rely on violence to solve all kinds of problems, i.e. the rumbling. Still though, some may say Eren's problematic violent mindset is fixed when he accepts the truth of the world. This is very wrong. Yes, he eventually accepts the reality of the world, but it tortures his character in the process. And of course it does. Finding out the man-eating monsters that he wants to eradicate are in fact victims to something he refused to consider, humanity, would understandably break him. Discovering the truth doesn't actually enlighten him with a sensible rationale, as he's always been somewhat twisted. So what it does instead is push him down a more violent path. A good example of this is when the scouts are exploring the world, looking for ways to secure the safety of paradise. Whilst everyone else is happy, Eren is distant as he knows the lives he's going to take in the future. At this point in the narrative, he seems to have moved away from his scorning hate and anger until a certain interaction exposes his true feelings. Holding Ramsay, Eren cries and says he wasn't just disappointed with the world when he found out the truth, but that he wanted to crush it. The world didn't live up to his image, and thus he didn't want it to exist. Does that sound like someone whose flawed, violent mindset in the past is gone, or has only gotten worse? It most definitely is the latter, and although his violent, vicious outbursts have become less frequent, his twisted hate inside has only been getting worse until it and his guilt surface when talking to Ramsay. Interestingly, his explanation of how he was feeling, that he wanted to destroy the world because it didn't live up to his dreams, sounds more childlike than anything he has possibly ever said. It's similar to a baby throwing a tantrum because they didn't get what they wanted. And although Eren phrases the sentence in past tense, it's something that he still feels strongly about, contributing to his breakdown. Isayama proves this when we move away from that flashback to the present day of him killing that boy during the rumbling, which also leads him to say he's finally reached freedom. Conveniently, in that moment, he is no longer depicted as the man he is, but the child he used to be, the child he sounded like when he said he wanted to destroy the world for not living up to his image. Isayama illustrates that adolescent ignorance through Eren's youth, as when we're young, we tend to be naive, ignorant and unaware. We only see positives, and so in his youthful appearance, he avoids to recognize the blood-curdling screams of fear in favor of the image he once dreamed over. absolute freedom, no boundaries. And the tragedy of this only continues, as it's not just Eren's flawed and violent mind that would convince him down this path, but also the fact he cannot look into the future. That's critical information. The attack titan can transcend time, access memories of future inheritors. However, he reveals he cannot see what will happen afterwards, i.e. the future, suggesting this plan works. The power of the titans must have been eradicated. Though I still think Isayama could have done a better job at making this aspect clearer, but at the same time, it is there. Nevertheless, bringing this all back, we can all agree the plan is possibly flawed, but simultaneously we must remember that a flawed character would potentially still believe it, especially Eren, who has believed in flawed ideas before. As a matter of fact, also supplementing his decision making here is his inherent idealism. Right now, I'm sure some will moan and say Isayama said this, or that in future interviews he says Eren is different to an idealist, which I don't think he'll do, but just in case he does, that doesn't even really matter. Obviously respect him, value his opinions and ideas above anyone else, as he is the creator. But when it comes to how your characters come across, it doesn't matter so much how you intended it, but how it comes across and how an idea can be interpreted through constant reinforcement with little to no contradiction. That's why it is unquestionable that Eren is an idealist, regardless of what anyone says, as the source material, the manga, shows that without question. The entire story hammers in our face that he is not normal. One of the reasons for that is because he thinks unlike anyone else. Case in point being the training arc. Feeling alone in his desire to join the Survey Corps, kill titans and reclaim freedom, Eren scoffs at every other candidate as they're too scared to fight. And although we agree with his sentiment, his ideals realistically come across naive, as humanity has never ever defeated the titans. And so, it comes as no surprise that many soldiers are frightened. They're all being realists, acknowledging the daunting practical considerations that titans are atop the food chain, and humanity has practically no hope. Jan breaks this bleak reality down for him. For every one titan, 30 humans have died. Yet, Eren doesn't care. He disregards that reality, using his feelings and dreams to justify his actions. He genuinely believes, or at least pretends to believe, that the world can become a better place if they overcome the titans, which is a fundamental trait of idealism, believing a better future is possible. More convincing is the fact he is presented as someone who is living in his own separate world compared to everyone else. Idealists can appear to live in a fantasy, separate from others, as they will act, maybe pretend bad things aren't happening, making it seem like harsher truths don't hurt them as much as everyone else. Therefore, because Eren leads towards a naive idealist, it would contribute as to why he would easily believe in the plan he follows. Although that maybe makes sense to most, especially side by side other contributing factors, few will still have a problem with the fact that I have been saying Eren is more an idealist than a realist, even a cynic. This stems from the anime, specifically season 1, when Pixis tells Eren he thinks like him, a cynic, with his response about an almighty evil being uniting everyone as too hopeful. Instead of taking this as the actual nod and foreshadow it is to the future of Eren doing exactly that, some have used this as fuel for their point that he is acting out of character. If you genuinely believe he is more cynical than an idealist, then wow, cynics often think humans act of their own interest, and so they're less likely to be fooled by tricks as they always suspect an ulterior motive. The result of having a wary mind is that the chances of suffering disappointment and depression are far lower than an idealist. Hence, a cynic is something you can definitely say isn't something that represents Eren, at least at large, as instead of being wary of people, he is far too trusting of humans, as he would not admit that he was fooled by Annie, even when it was right in front of his eyes. Unlike a cynic, he never suspects humanity could be the enemy, and when he does, he says the world utterly disappointed him, something that is also difficult for cynics to experience as they never set an image for the world like Eren does. As a matter of fact, it is due to Eren's idealism that he becomes a tortured character, as his dreams and goals clash with the reality of the cruel world, which seemingly makes him more dejected over the story. As for him possibly being a realist, no again. Of course though, people can be an idealist and a realist at the same time. I personally believe to be like this. At the end of the day, humans are not checkboxes where you can tick them off as one set of beliefs. We're complex and have views that agree with one side and some with another. Think of it more like a scale, and on that you would place Eren more towards an idealist. It cannot be denied that he who swears to kill all the titans of which no one has stood a chance is extremely idealistic. It disregards the realities of the world in favour of a future that can be better. Furthermore, idealistic people tend to propel change, as they, unlike realists, push boundaries. Eren is the one who literally advances the story to chase his dreams and desires. Altruism is also an idea heavily associated with idealists, which is someone who is happy seeing the people they love thrive. And one of the reasons Eren is committing to the rumbling is for the sake of his friends and to live long, happy lives. You know what? I'm going to stop. I think this matter has been long put to rest. With that out of the way, I ask you, taking into context all the points as you should, if someone like Eren Yeager, a man who has been inherently flawed since the beginning of the story, tortured by the reality of the world due to his naive idealism, saw a violent future where it united his people, freed the world of Titans, and that his friends would live long, happy lives, would he not choose it? Of course he would. Moving on though, it's fair to say my magnum opus to you guys probably watching my video was my previous Attack on Titan video that received lots of love. In it, I denounced the idea that violence in the story was ever being glorified. 99% of the people agreed until chapter 139, and I had a few people say that the ending actually glorifies, even justifies, the violence. However, that couldn't be further from the truth. Unfortunately, the majority still recognize the ending aligns with my analysis. In chapter 139, we see Eren pay the consequence for the rumbling. He can no longer live as he himself knows his actions are unforgivable, so as punishment, he must accept death, and suffer the pain of never being able to be with the person he loves, see his friends, and never be able to live a long, happy life. But possibly the greatest punishment of all though, is the fact that the reader can infer he is no longer free, and perhaps never has been. This is because we see it was him who pushed himself down this path by killing his own mother, which he needed to do to achieve his desires. Isn't that a twisted punishment for someone who has been chasing freedom the entire story, to find out that they may not have only been a slave to the narrative or the idea of freedom, but ultimately a slave to themselves due to an inability to fundamentally change? In addition, don't forget the immediate outcome of Eren's death. During the rumbling, in the face of humanity being wiped out, we saw Miller give a grand speech that if they had another chance to live, they'd never act on hate again, suggesting they will stop their wrongful treatment of the Eldians. This came as a surprise to hear, and would also be something Eren notices, yet again another contributing factor on its own as to why he went down this path. However, remember that Eren says he has no way of knowing what happens after his death, which means anything he believes will happen afterwards is made up from logical assumptions that are hard to disprove. But the problem here is that as solid and near on accurate as his guesses are about the future, there is no guarantee that it plays out exactly as he believes or for how long. And that's what we see. We witness humanity revert to a familiar picture, them going back on their words. Miller and his men instantly point their guns at the Eldians, throwing out the window their previous statement of change. As annoying and frustrating as this is, I love that Isayama does this, as it synergizes with the depiction of humanity in Attack on Titan, emphasizing an almost nihilistic outlook on us. Yes, I say us, because this is something we see in the real world, where conflict is promised to end, and it just continues. It's in our nature to fight. In Attack on Titan's world, we see endless conflict. Even at times when there is prosperity in the Eldian Empire, they didn't just settle, they created war within. This applies to all nations as well. Now expecting a U-turn from Attack on Titan's world to all of a sudden forget centuries worth of violence and war would be the most detached thing from the story. In fact, if this did happen, that after Eren's rumbling, the world had united, conflict ended, then yes, that would 100% be glorifying violence, as it shows it is justified since it attains the desired outcome of peace. However, Isayama clearly doesn't do that. But I'm sure some may point towards the infamous Armin dialogue interaction with Eren, which supposedly supports his violence, justifying it, right? No. For me, Isayama does a good enough job conveying Armin isn't happy with Eren's actions, but that he also has mixed feelings due to the bond between them. It's clear he doesn't approve of Eren's actions, as he literally calls it a mass error, but Isayama has to consider Armin's feelings for Eren as they're practically brothers. And so, when he hears that Eren has put himself through unimaginable pain for the sake of his friends, he understandably cannot help but feel a kind of gratitude by the motivation behind his twisted actions. But either way, I'm not a blind fanboy to say this is faultless, as Isayama didn't do a good enough job at making this aspect clearer. Regardless though, we do see further examples of Isayama clearly not condoning the rumbling, as he establishes the peace Eren believed would come about is actually on rocky ground. Eldia are only free for now through the implied fear of their military power over the world. This is Isayama telling us readers a negative consequence of the violence, as the radical Eldians, Yeagerists, have taken over with mass support from everyone in the nation. On the surface though, you may say this seems like it's glorifying and justifying his violence, as it affords Eldia the time to become a powerful nation with an advanced military. It also doesn't help that everyone else is seen cheering and celebrating Eren, right? This is where a big distinction is established between what the world of Attack on Titan thinks and Isayama. It makes sense the Yeagers, who were already on Eren's side, praise and worship his actions as they momentarily save and even boost the island. Hence, it also makes sense that many of the Eldian people cheer his name as he's their saviour from the people outside who have always hated them for just being born. And yet, Isayama subtly complicates this as we see his commentary on the matter through a little inclusion of the Braus family, who are disinterested. Why include this if he is glorifying Eren's violence? Why create any doubt? It's simply because he's not glorifying the violence. The Braus family are a brilliant gateway to channel a message that undercuts the glorification of violence, as they were victims to the cycle of violence, which Eldia is implied to be pushing forward. Though so many have missed this, Eren's actions give the nation an edge, certainly, just as the Marlins had at one time, but it doesn't mean they're right or good. It's far more complex. Also, there is a huge difference between Isayama's view and the view of those within the world he created. Simultaneously, this all shows he had the difficult job of not only reprimanding Eren's actions, but to also allow a little room of success so that it didn't make his death meaningless. He does this by ensuring his actions have short-term victories, which in turn help achieve one of his goals, his friends living long, happy lives. His other desire to eradicate the Titans is temporarily successful in the short term. Yet, despite Isayama giving Eren some of these short-term victories, the overall feeling from his story is still one of great tragedy due to his irredeemable actions being met with severe consequences. Some will say Eren's violence is justified by the lack of any alternatives, which are always presented negatively or with ambiguity. Specifically, the peace talks are shrouded in doubt, but that doesn't justify or propel his violence as correct. Instead, it presents the multitudes of complications present in Attack on Titan's world, even ours. Who's to say that just talking is going to work? If they were to frame it or heavily suggest that this method of talking is going to work, it would massively undermine the complications these characters face. It would make everyone who's lived within this world seem like extremely ignorant fools who just needed to talk. Ending the story open-ended creates discourse and honours the portrayal of the story and its inhabitants. There is never an easy option, otherwise the world of Attack on Titan wouldn't be so cruel. Certainly talking instead of violence is the better option. I don't doubt that. But who knows if it will work in a world ravaged by constant conflict and human condition. It's for this reason I kept on reiterating before the release of the additional pages that the ending doesn't justify or glorify Eren's violence, and then validating my points with the aforementioned additional pages, which unforgivingly sticks to the themes. Those who cried Eren's violence was being rewarded and glorified will look away because there's no doubt now, since we see the cycle of violence continues. Eren was naive and far too idealistic, as his violence didn't help secure peace for his people, as it actually lends to their implied demise. Further rubbing salt in the wounds of those who say his actions are justified is the fact the last panel suggests the Titans are going to return, undercutting his main accomplishment. For these reasons, the colossal failure of Eren's actions in the additional pages will make many feel his death is now meaningless. For some, they will even insist everything he has ever done is pointless, so he may as well have done nothing. And honestly, that's ridiculous and extremely petty. That kind of criticism reeks of people who were emotionally fixated on an unrealistic outcome. And this argument is even more pointless as Isayama sprinkles a few details that alleviate these concerns, as we see the people he loved clearly live long lives until eventually passing away. This makes his actions bittersweet, although he didn't achieve true long-term success. He still achieved one of his goals. Trust me, I understand it's hard to not feel extremely down when we see Eldia, or Paradise to be specific, turn into rubble. But please remember, violence has always been met with consequences. It is not the instrument to be used to achieve long-term success. It may get you short-term results, but everything will eventually come full circle, as it always has in the story. The grander the act, the greater the reaction, i.e. the destruction of Paradise due to the destruction of the world by Eren. Admittedly though, the faithfulness to themes in the story to the very end has its own problems. One being that it's incredibly miserable and possibly far too dark for some people to digest. And that's why I'd go as far to say these additional pages were not needed, as this is something that was already implied within chapter 139. It would have been better to leave the door open to many of the things he gives answers to in the additional pages, not just because they're extremely heavy, but also because of pacing. And that is one of the biggest complaints about the ending. is specifically the final chapter, as it felt like if it was spaced out between 3 chapters instead of 1, many things would be digested and delivered much better. However, because we don't get that, we get abrupt conclusions and conversations that should have been far more nuanced getting brushed over in order to sprint to the end. I'm sure I'm shocking many people right now as I have been largely defending the ending, but as I said all the way at the beginning, there are flaws, which you'll hear more about past this section. And why not in this section, you may ask? Well, because, in general, I feel Isayama handled Eren appropriately. I think he executes it largely well. Eren's ending is in fact my favourite part about the conclusion of Attack on Titan, since it not only honours his character, but the story by highlighting many of its themes. For that reason, he is one of the greatest main characters I've ever witnessed. Throughout the entire story of Attack on Titan, there has been the overt representation of Mikasa's extraordinary attachment to Eren. An aspect that colours this dynamic extraordinary is her romantic feelings towards him. Funny enough, that feels no way near as controversial to say as Eren loving her, since her feelings are obvious and not convoluted through an all-encompassing goal. Unlike him, she doesn't have multiple desires that require plenty of time and sacrifice. Her wish is to simply be with him, wherever and whenever. The story makes her romantic feelings unmistakable, from characters suggesting he is her boyfriend to outright admitting her feelings. However, that doesn't seem extraordinary until you start to consider that it isn't just love that binds her to him, but her very life's purpose and existence. After Eren has seemingly died early in the story, Mikasa doesn't care about living anymore, but then finds a reason by not wanting the memories of him to vanish. You see, even with his literal existence no longer being a part of the world, she still finds a way to live through him. This dependency has been continuously depicted, with her picking Eren over everything, such as the time she was willing to commit mutiny and stand up against the military for him. And because that's the case, it's fitting that so many people within the fanbase, including me, called Mikasa somewhat shallow, as her only purpose seemed to be Eren's lover. Everything she has ever done or wishes to do is guided by the idea of him. It's for this reason you essentially could say she is a slave to him. Her deep love renders her dependent, unable to defy him, meaning ironically, she is enslaved by something that's supposed to be beautiful and liberating. However, by the time we reach the final arc, you'll notice her subtle growth over the course of the entire narrative come to the forefront. Now, she has grown bonds to others, such as John, Connie, Sasha, and even Levi. The dynamic with Levi in particular is a brilliant example of her subtle change, as he was someone who she had a poor relationship with, often due to the treatment of Eren. Yet that changes as they develop an understanding. Instead of just talking for the sake of a mission, she's actually concerned and asks if he's feeling fine. Even after Liberario, she stands by as she recognizes why Levi beats Eren, something she would have previously stopped no matter the reasoning. Of course though, Sasha is the most obvious example of Mikasa forming connections outside of Eren. Plenty of funny interactions between the two happen to also reveal the side of Mikasa before the day of the kidnappers. Nevertheless, it's because of these little developments over the narrative and many others that she is no longer the same character. And so as she sees the destruction by Eren, she is pushed to the point when enough is enough. She ties the scarf around her neck and is finally willing to act. She is someone that over the course of the story has formed bonds with other characters, establishing herself as an individual, but most importantly, she understands that no love should come at the cost of countless lives. Her paralyzing feelings of love tell her to not defy Eren, but she manages to overcome that and kill him for the sake of humanity. Through this act, the mental hurdle she jumps liberates the founder Ymir. Just like Mikasa, she was so strongly attached to the person she loved that she never disobeyed or stood against his wishes. She was a slave to him. In fact, the very reason the power of the Titans continued is because the man she loved, the king, wished it to last, and so feeling unable to defy him, she has followed his command for thousands of years. Of course, King Fritz was a tyrant. He abused her and yet she still loved him, something that even surprises Eren, which heavily suggests she suffers from Stockholm Syndrome. However, when Mikasa, someone in a similar sort of dilemma, is able to act against the person she loves for the betterment of the world, Ymir finally understands and gains the agency to do what she should have done many years ago: lift the curse. Both were enslaved by love. In the cruel world of Attack on Titan, no one in the story has been depicted to love as deeply as Mikasa, to the point many took it as a generic female shonen character fawning over the protagonist. But Isayama uses that trope, twisting it into his world to free the person in prison for over 2,000 years, which retroactively adds significant weight and justification to Mikasa's behaviour previously as a calculated approach. This is why the connection between the two is one of my favourite reveals, since Mikasa was someone who I thought was essentially a slave to Eren, but Isayama revealing that was all by purpose for a reason that genuinely makes sense, elevates her so highly now, it even manages to give a satisfying conclusion to Ymir. But that's all it is. Satisfying. It is nowhere near as complex and nuanced as Mikasa's because, as some will say, she doesn't have the same amount of time to develop. Yet with that being said, Isayama should have done more. Some may moan, but remember, she is the founder, who was enslaved for thousands of years, so it would have been interesting to see more done with her in the aftermath of being freed. Of course, Isayama expands on Ymir's ending in the additional pages, which clarifies a few details, but it doesn't do enough. One of the few things it makes clear is why Mikasa has been getting constant headaches throughout the entire story. It wasn't because Eren tampered with her memory, but because Ymir was frequently peering into her mind. It's important to note she wasn't tampering, rather taking a peek, as Ymir would have seen her in a similar situation as her, and so was seeing if she could do something she could not. However, that's realistically all the additional pages do with Ymir, which isn't even for her, but to make a situation related to Mikasa clearer. I feel Isayama could have definitely added more to Ymir, possibly flesh out the details as to why she fell in love with King Fritz. She just needed something extra. It's precisely for that reason why her storyline, whilst brilliant in idea, was one of the aspects that actually fell short for me. Still good, but not near the polished and iconic level status she could have become. A criticism that has been pretty common amongst those who have problems with the ending is the lack of clarity. And yet, an instance I'm happy is ambiguous and open-ended is the time Mikasa and Eren are seen to have possibly lived with each other. In chapter 138, she is on her way to confront him, and then starts to get searing headaches, which then leads to her either remembering or dreaming about a cozy, simple life with Eren. If Mikasa is remembering that she lived with Eren for multiple years instead of dreaming, then that suggests he may have spared a moment in real time to spend what felt like multiple years with her in the past. We know this is possible as time in the past is significantly quicker. The ripple effect of this is significant, as it would add an undeniable justification for Eren's emotional anguish at the thought of losing her. This is because he would remember the time they spent 4 years romantically together. Yet the problem with Mikasa and Eren living together is why does she not remember this? And is Eren then tampering with her mind, which shouldn't be possible? It's for these reasons why many assume that when we see Mikasa living with Eren, that it did not actually happen. Instead, this is what she dreams as a possibility if she had confessed her love to Eren the night he asked. Subsequently, this would all wash away concerns of him tampering with her mind since it is only a figment of her imagination, which also explains why she wouldn't remember it as it never happened. There is also other minor reasons, such as the way Eren's physical appearance is presented. As Mikasa begins to accept the reality of the situation outside, we begin to see the titan marks appear on his face as she is possibly accepting the reality that she's in a dream and needs to accept the reality outside. This also happens to relate back to chapter 1. Isayama doesn't give a clear answer as to how, but since we can only infer in this instance, the best bet is that Eren is peering into Mikasa's mind, seeing her dream of him and her together. This makes sense as the most likely situation, but some may say an Ackerman's mind is invulnerable against the Titan powers, and so Eren wouldn't be able to see inside her mind. Well, that's not entirely accurate. I for the longest time assumed this too, but that's what it is, a common assumption by fans when we heard the explanation by Kenny's grandpa. When he said the Ackermans were hunted down because of their inability to be controlled, we all jumped to the conclusion that all Titan powers are ineffective against them. Yet, note the specific wording that constantly repeats whenever the matter is discussed. Kenny's grandpa says the Ackermans were hunted as the ability to erase memories wouldn't work, and so they could not be controlled. Isayama is purposely specific about the Bloodline's ability against Titan powers, which is to resist their minds being altered. Regardless, with that bombshell out of the way, we then see Mikasa carry Eren's head to Armin, giving the two a chance to mourn the loss of a lover and a brother. This then leads us to the final page, where we see Mikasa return to the tree Eren is now buried at, which happens to be the same place the story began. The emotions of the scene need to be noted, as this moment hit in a way I didn't expect. We see Mikasa become overwhelmed with grief, her scarf drops, and then a bird wraps it around her. Of course, it is up to you to decide if it just represents Eren or is literally him reincarnated, but the message Isayama conveys here at the end is beautiful, a callback to one of his favourite moments in the story. Nevertheless, as good as Mikasa's conclusion is, I felt it missed an opportunity to show a clear distinction between her being free from Eren and grieving for him at the end. The ending scene is French kiss and really hits harder than anything I've seen on a page, but some still misinterpret elements of it by saying she will forever be imprisoned by her grief, so how is she exactly free from Eren? Fortunately, the additional pages fulfill this distinction. Isayama gave her the choice to move on, which is conveyed by the suggested idea that she marries Jan. In order for that to happen, Mikasa would have to approve. Oh, and I also know there will be a couple of stans annoyed, but they did also clearly establish that he has a thing for her. The development of their relationship isn't even significant, but what it represents is far more important. Before going into this section, I think it's important to remember that although a character may deserve a happy ending, that doesn't mean they're guaranteed one. Fortunately though, Levi has what I believe to be amongst the happier endings. He is a man who has been serving in the military for a long time, and has survived where all his comrades and subordinates have not. He has witnessed immeasurable amounts of loss, and yet always manages to find a heart to dedicate. However, for all his success, there was one command he'd yet accomplish. He's promised to Erwin that he'd killed Zeke, the Beast Titan. In chapter 137 though, he does exactly that. He fulfills his mission, and even better, he finally sees the soldiers both Hanji and Erwin spoke of. This gives him the closure to their deaths, but also meaning to their sacrifices. He sees them and will remember them. After that, we have a brief time skip, where we see Levi is no longer able to be in active duty, but fortunately has people looking after him, instead of him looking after others. His ending is one I'm pretty certain is universally loved, even by those who hate the final chapter, as it gave an ending that closed the book on all his plot threads whilst managing to give him a happy ending that is justified. Another character that I feel is flawless is Zeke's. I know that was in chapter 137 instead of 139, but it's done so well that I just have to talk about it for a moment. He's a character that's set up as the main antagonist due to the simple fact he can speak in Titan form, suggesting he is the one commanding the Titans. And besides that being true to some extent, it's only a small aspect to the much larger picture. As in reality, Zeke is just another victim. Living in Mali, he and his family receive vile abuse for their race. Being Eldians mean they are automatically evil due to their ancestor sins being attributed upon them. From birth, he is fighting a battle he did not start, nor one he wants. To make matters worse, his father Grisha forces another battle on his shoulders, as he only has Zeke to fight a cold war within Mali. He is treated as a pawn rather than a son, told to constantly work, believe in the cause, and become the warrior candidate. It's so bad that in order to feel any affection from his parents, he plays to their wants, cherishing any little praise he can get. However, he struggles to match his peers, and so was going to be knocked off the course until he meets Dr. Kurtzeva, who becomes the father Grisha failed to be. And yet still, when Grisha hears Mali is on the tails of the Restorationists, he tries to save his parents by persuading them to move away from the cause. Instead, he is the one pushed away. Feeling like a tool rather than a son, he follows Kurtzeva's advice and turns his parents in. Otherwise, everyone related to him would be killed. From Isayama's backstory, we no longer look at Zeke turning in his parents as the easy, vindictive and backstabbing decision we initially thought it was. Through a simple tool of perspective, I not only completely understand, but sympathise with him, as they never truly loved him. This bleak upbringing of receiving constant abuse, being treated like a pawn instead of the son he is, leads to his tragic solution to solve these problems. To ensure that no Eldian has to suffer what Zeke and many others experience, he believes life is no longer worth living, that it will be better for them and the world if they don't exist, thus ushering in his plan of euthanization. Eventually he meets Eren, who Zeke plans to initiate this plan with, but first of all, he believes he must save his brother from their father's manipulation. Yet, he sees nothing but love. Grisha learned from his mistakes with Zeke, and in fact felt intense regret as they finally get to see each other through the power of the founder and the past. Here Zeke gets the closure he's long needed, but is then quickly warned to stop Eren, who goes on to trigger the rumbling. Tricked, defeated, and used by Eren, Zeke is now stuck in the past for what must have felt like an eternity, and so develops a far more nihilistic view of life. When he talks to Armin, he expresses life as pointless. Living is just prolonged emptiness, but then Armin shows him with a beautifully drawn panel that the little things in life are worth living for. Life's not empty, we give it meaning by choosing what's worth living. Therefore, finally accepting the beauty of life and finally seeing the light makes Zeke feel something he's never felt: peace, liberation, and life itself. And although Levi kills him immediately after, it's not as sad as it would have been if Zeke died without ever finding happiness. This is an immaculate character ending with some of the most gripping material I've ever seen in fiction. Chapter 121 is a highlight itself, the very definition of a page turner. Now though, moving away from one of the most positive conclusions to one of the most underwhelming, we have Historia, whose ending left me frustrated. Actually, that's a lie. I initially felt like that until I began writing this exact video and started to notice that not only did I like her ending, or that it made sense, but that it had to happen. Before reading the manga, she was one of my favourite characters due to her development, and since reading the manga multiple times, I find her even better. She begins the story as Krista, someone who comes across as the stereotypical girl, possibly a representation of the generic female shonen character. She is caring, selfless and kind, for seemingly no reason or ulterior motive in a world where Isayama writes grounded characters who always have reasons for their actions. She seems at odds with the world, which makes her stand out in a jarring kind of way. However, she then starts to become interesting. Through Ymir's teasing, we see that there may be more under the surface, more under the Miss Perfect Act. Eventually, that's what we find out, as she has been trying to kill herself by throwing her life in impossible situations, meaning there was always an ulterior motive. This specific revelation brings another level of re-evaluation of her character. Her real name is Historia, who happens to be an illegitimate child of the royal family. From childhood, she was shunned, treated like the plague, and ignored by her own mother for simply being born. No one wanted her around, and so she became Krista, a character in a book who was loved for being everything she pretended to be earlier in the story. Ymir, a character who comes across uptight, is the one who actually sees through this act and helps her embrace her real name, Historia. Through Ymir, she actually begins to become even more confident and even a little bit selfish as she starts to live for herself. It is clear that the two love each other, yet the world will not let it happen, as Ymir is then taken away, leaving Historia alone and guideless. As a result, she secludes into a shell and becomes absolutely miserable. In that state of mind, she is then asked by Levi to become the queen for the sake of the people. But how can she even become a figurehead when she doesn't value herself? She doesn't know if she's worthy, and she doesn't even know who she is. Historia was playing a character for so long that she has an identity crisis. Also, don't forget at this point, she has been living her entire life for others instead of herself. And so being mentally fragile, she cracks under Levi's pressure and accepts to become queen, preventing many deaths. But yet, this isn't a celebration. It's a heartbreaking moment. Historia's words show how traumatized she is. My next role is to be queen, right? I'll do it. The only way for her to live is to play another character and not be herself. Following this theme of letting others choose her life, her father Rod Rice also tells her to become a Titan and kill her friend Eren. But this time, she doesn't listen. After a lifetime of people telling her what to do, she finally remembers Ymir telling her to live her own life, not for others. So she finally heeds that advice and rejects her father. She finally finds her voice. And moments later, she is the one who also saves the people by killing her own father, and then proclaims she is the true queen of the walls, at last embracing her identity instead of running from it. Now if you ask me, that is one hell of a mega transformation from a character who was pretending to be Miss Perfect to the worst girl who's ever lived. And yet, the ending doesn't expand on this. It still felt like a final chapter was left in her story, such as her ability as a ruler, right? No, it's at this point, as I mentioned before, that I realised what I just proposed and what I've seen from others is at complete odds with her arc, a betrayal of her character. Her entire development has been to not live for the sake of others, but to live for herself. Her being the queen and ruler doesn't work. What does is her looking after the farm she grew up on, and helping others who are in a similar predicament she was in as a child. Isayama cutting her away from the core plots and events, intentional or not, comes across as a metaphorical representation of this. She doesn't want to be involved, and so she's simply not. What she does is no longer relevant to the demands of the story, as she is living for herself. On the other hand, an aspect of criticism that hasn't changed is Isayama's decision to turn people into titans to then only reverse it in the following chapter. It feels cheap in ways Attack on Titan has never been. It's actually for this factor that both John and Connie's ending is a mixed bag. In the previous chapter, they were dead. And then the actual send-off itself, as the two friends comfort each other in the face of their imminent death, is brilliant. However, he undoes that by bringing them back. And I'm not saying they couldn't return, just not this soon, and most certainly not the immediate chapter after. If Isayama wanted to bring them back, he should have done this earlier, spaced it out. In spite of that annoyance though, I do like everything else Isayama did with them. In particular, when the two see Sasha, a friend who was recently taken away from them, something I'm sure they're yet to get over, and so this affords them the chance to move on. Connie also gets closure on his mother as she returns to her human form. Throughout the story, Isayama has spread moments of him fixated on his mother. For example, we'd see panels of people discussing his visits to the village. So when he has this breakdown, it's a culmination of feelings that have been brewing in the background coming to the forefront. However, at the same time, I think Isayama could have done a better job at delivering this in a more creative and impactful way, instead of just one panel. Nonetheless, I really want to review Reiner's conclusion now. Similar to Isayama, he became one of my favourite characters, and just like Historia, revelations about his past make you reevaluate his previous actions with a lot more sympathy. This is because we learn he only broke the wall down and killed many people because he believed he was genuinely saving the world. That sounds crazy, I know, but he did suffer years of indoctrination, a century's worth of propaganda. How is someone supposed to know their actions are wrong when everything they're being told since childhood is that their actions are in fact morally right? And so Reiner did what he did to become a hero, save his people, save his mother, and save the world. But he ended up participating in the endless cycle of violence. As a result, we see him become mentally ravaged. Everything he has ever been told is wrong. The people on the walls are not devils, but humans who had no clue what was going on, and he killed many of them. Despite knowing this, we see him in denial, trying his best to brush this off, and yet the guilt still seeps through. His conversation at the dinner table exemplifies this. He acts as if the people in the walls were what he was told, but his description of them sounds incredibly human. Everyone else is mortified as they don't understand what Reiner says, and because he is in denial, he doesn't even know how he speaks about them. It's only with his confrontation with Eren that he is able to fully confess his feelings, admit his guilt, explain how foolish he was as a child, and that he feels unworthy to live. It's surprisingly, instead of cutting him down further, Eren chooses to show mercy. He doesn't blame him anymore, as he knows he was raised in ignorance. He didn't have a choice. However, that doesn't stop Eren from fighting him, and so unprepared and lacking the will, Reiner is easily defeated. Although, he is not killed, which results in his reintroduction during the Rumbling arc. Yet the problems he felt before remain. He still cannot forgive himself for what he did in the past. It especially doesn't help that there is possibly no one left that may comprehend his situation. Bertolt was killed and Annie captured, so how is anyone meant to understand him? How is he able to move on? This is the final part of his arc, trying to find redemption, understanding, and maybe, if possible, forgiveness. This is all achieved when Reiner teams up with his former friends, people he wronged. Despite that, John eventually ends up saying these words. He and everyone else understands him now. This is because before that point, they had been working together to save the world, but all the people they knew, their friends, tell them they're traitors and enemies. You know who else experienced that? Reiner, when he smashed the walls down, when he killed many people, even his friends, as he believed he was saving the world. The parallels are strong. Finally, there are now people who understand him, and with that, they know the pain he shoulders. Far more significantly, it's the people he wronged that truly understand his situation, resulting in them forgiving him. And that there effectively completes Reiner's arc. It comes full circle, except one thing, possibly the source of all his unhappiness, and the reason why he needed to seek forgiveness in the first place, his mother. She raised him in a similar way to how Grisha raised Zeke. She put expectations, pressures, and hopes of a better life onto him, and never treated him like the son he was, never accepted him for who he was, as she was more concerned about what he could do. That's why the final moments when she finally sees him, Reiner, for who he is for the first time and accepts him as just that, is the end of his arc. For some, he may not have achieved forgiveness, but one thing you cannot deny is that he finally feels understood and accepted. That's why this moment here in the final chapter is just Isayama showing Reiner hasn't been swallowed by the world, and that he still has that ridiculous essence which paired out in moments during the story. Regardless, I've still got to touch on a few more elements, so let me go through them quicker. One of the best surprises of the ending is the significance of Floch. He was someone who always believed a devil would be needed to secure Paradise's victory, so seeing him latch onto Eren is fitting as he accepts that mantle. I also love his turn to a Joker kind of persona as it made his actions unpredictable and menacing, adding to the chaos. For Hanji, Isayama gives her a grand spectacle, dying amongst the Titans. As heroic as that is though, it's bittersweet as she understands her failings as a leader. She was unable to show Eren a path towards hope. She became complicit in the very corrupt government she overthrew, and she simply acted too slowly. Not everyone is a powerful commander like Erwin. It's what made him special. That's why I like the ending for Hanji, and it's also why I said that a sad ending doesn't equal bad. It makes sense that she goes out this way. What about Gabi and her friends from Mali? Well, cover your ears, Gabi haters, as I love her character, since she brings into focus the ancestor theme. In fact, she begins the story as possibly the greatest victim of the ancestor messaging, not because she physically suffers like Grisha, but because she believes in it, or at least tries to. She convinces herself that all Eldians need to atone for the sins of their ancestors, and that the people across the sea, in paradise are the worst, irredeemable devils. For her, she hopes that one day she can show Marley that not all Eldians are bad and can in fact be allies, which is why she refuses to remove her armband in paradise. The armband also makes a clear distinction for her between Marley Eldians, who can be good, and the devils. Simultaneously, that shows how flawed her mindset is. The thing that draws the line between what deems a good Eldian and a bad one is a piece of cloth which Falco easily rips off. And that wouldn't be the first time her fickle worldview would be torn down. When escaping the prison cells in paradise, her and Falco meet Kaya, who befriends the two. Kaya is the girl who Sasha saved in chapter 36, and now lives with the Browse family, who also takes both Gabi and Falco in. However, upon hearing the two talk about Marley, Kaya questions why many innocent people had to die, specifically her mother, who was not involved in the war. Of course, from Gabi's shallow answers rooted in her fragmented belief to Kaya's cries of anguish, she just stares. She has no more answers. Deep down, she knows that what she's been taught her whole life is potentially wrong. But that gripping moment doesn't convince her yet. One moment that comes close and starts to remove the curtains is when it is revealed who she is to the Browse family. The girl who killed a daughter, the girl who killed a sister, the girl who killed a lover, the girl who killed Sasha Browse. The gut-wrenching consequences of her violence is put on display with an explosive breakdown of emotions, not between people pushing the story forward, but the bystanders of it. For Gabi in particular, we now start to see her become more hesitant about acting on what she has been taught, which develops to her fully admitting the faults of her belief in chapter 126. Amidst the chaos of Eren crashing the walls down, she saves Kaya from getting eaten by Niall's Titan. The two have a moment together since the last time they saw each other, when Kaya had nothing but pain and hate in her eyes, ready to kill Gabi. However, she now looks at her with only pain as she understands she has to move on, which prompts Gabi to admit her faults, essentially completing her arc. She finally has been freed from the burden of the ancestor messaging. One person in fact who always pokes holes in the sins of the ancestor theme is Falco. This factor amongst the many is why everyone loves his character. Unlike many involved in the story, he's neither an extreme hater of the Marlians or the Eldians. He knows the truth and strives for fairness. He is simply a great character with a solid ending. And yes, I'm not going to go into detail about Falco and anyone else, as I would be here all day. So I'm going to move on to something else that has left me very confused and disappointed in a portion of the fanbase. In an interview, Isayama explained his thoughts about the ending of Attack on Titan, noting his disappointment in not being able to please everyone, and that even the conclusion may have been too complex for him to wrap up. Of course he said this, as it would be extremely difficult for anyone to say they weren't disappointed with their own ending when a loud minority who disliked the ending was extremely volatile. They would sap the energy of those who liked the ending, resulting in heads turning away from the franchise due to the negative energy attached to it. And that's not to say you can't dislike the franchise, but there's a difference from expressing an opinion and abusing people for their beliefs. Heck, people were abusing the creator. Besides that, it's also important to take Isayama's own criticisms with a grain of salt, as in spite of how revered the story ever became, even during its peak moments, he would always find a way to criticize his own work. This tells us naturally he's a humble person, which should be commended. But no, it is instead being weaponized against him, with people manipulating his words, taking them out of context just to justify their views that the ending wasn't good. Specifically, these groups of people are pushing the agenda that Isayama changed the ending from what he wanted. The obvious intention of this is to satisfy their idea that the ending wasn't good as it wasn't staying true to the story and was portraying the previous setup in the narrative. The problem with all of this though is that it can be easily debunked by actually going back to the prior events and seeing how they match up to the ending of the story, particularly the last chapter. For instance, in the first chapter, we see Eren experience his famous dream, which is a future memory of him seeing Mikasa in what I explained before as him looking into her head. In that dream, she says goodbye to him, and the same words that appeared then appear in chapter 1. He comments about her hair as he's confused as to why it's so long since in the dream it is shorter. Besides that, there are other smaller hints, such as the mark on the tree. This looks oddly similar to a crucifix, thus coinciding with chapter 139 as it is his burial place. To deny that as just luck or coincidence is fine. I would agree if it wasn't for the further dozen plus details that relate to the events later on. Isayama meticulously planned this story, at the very least the core beats. One of my favourite details that proves the ending has been planned is the mantis connection. Both the anime and manga are fixated with the random appearance of a mantis to depict the cruelty of the world. More intriguing is that it is only Mikasa who is associated with the insect, which is fitting as the mantis is known to devour the heads of their partners. And what do we see in the penultimate chapter? Mikasa beheading the person she loves, meaning the mantis was foreshadowing her actions. If people need more, well, there was the obvious Reiner and Bertolt hints. Isayama planned well ahead and gave us a ridiculous number of clues. The Dinah Fritz significance is also foreshadowed. When Eren activates his powers before it's revealed, she is the Smiling Titan. In chapter 89, we see Gruger look into Eren's memories, which reveals one of his drives is to save Armin and Mikasa. This in fact not only sheds light on his motivations, but also the ability of the Attack Titan to look into future memories of its inheritors. I could honestly go on and on about how this story has planned details that constantly relate to the ending. However, I won't, as I really want to talk about the anime now. Naturally, with the end of the manga done, there will be the upcoming anime adaptation of the conclusion by Studio Mappa. Remember that although Attack on Titan's anime is a faithful adaptation, pretty much exactly the same as the manga, it's still separate. Isayama himself has echoed this belief, which makes sense as he has purposely told animators to change things to perfect ideas and storylines that fell short in the manga. And I say all this because it's important for those who feel let down by the ending that the anime adaptation may be better for you. However, there is also the significant chance that they will just copy everything the manga does, and just add more breathing room and development. In fact, bringing life to certain scenes can potentially add a whole new dimension. I'm not the only one who feels this way, as Isayama has also said that voice actors can bring nuances to scenes which cannot be conveyed through pages. I believe that's a genuine possibility. Obviously, I cannot read the future, so this isn't a prediction, rather a hope. That the anime's ending will be able to convey elements I wasn't so happy with better, and things that I did like even greater. The Armin scene of him talking to Eren is one I can see getting radical improvements in terms of the ideas being conveyed. The complex emotions Isayama wanted to send were understood by me, but many others did not, and that's a failure to some degree on Isayama. Fortunately, the voice actors can add so much depth to this scene. The little wave or whatever it may be in their voice can convey more depth than any image or words can. A good example of what I'm talking about is the Gabi and Reiner scene. In the manga, this is eye-opening, but in the anime, it's harrowing and unsettling, as this person you've been hating is genuinely terrified by what we've deemed for so long as the good guys. That was achieved in the anime because of the gut-wrenching performance by the voice actor. It brought a whole new dynamic, conveying some complex ideas through a scene that remains unchanged from the manga. Since I'm speaking about Season 4 Part 1, I would like to say it is a brilliant follow-up of what I declared as the greatest season of storytelling. No show rivals the pacing, development, twists, action and music within Part 2 of Season 3. And yet, Season 4 nearly topped that with a laser-focused story that perfectly unravels its next big beat. Of course, I know there were some production problems, but the storyboarding, cinematography, and acting surpassed the level I didn't know was possible. It's for this reason I'm excited for the upcoming release of Part 2, which I'm equally curious to see how well they adapt. Hopefully it will get its fair chance to impress, as I believe the manga material is especially suited to TV. Not everyone is happy, and that's something I think most knew would happen. I most definitely did. There was no chance that this story was going to have everyone on board. Funny enough, I remember before the ending, I and others constantly said that Attack on Titan wouldn't need a bombastic or crazy ending, but one that simply lands. And if that happens, then its legacy would be secured. The ending does that. I like the ending. It's not perfect, nor at the level we're so used to from Attack on Titan, but it's still strong. Especially good enough for me to solidify the legacy it was building itself, a modern classic, a masterpiece, and most definitely the best story I've ever consumed. For that fact alone, I have to say thank you to Isayama for crafting something that has resonated with me so strongly and has personally helped me. Without Attack on Titan, many of you wouldn't have found my channel, nor watched this video right now. So thank you for also enjoying this journey with me. With that being said, I would also like to know if you liked the ending too, and if you didn't, please don't be afraid to drop your comments below. I may engage with some, but I most probably won't respond to those who mention stuff that I've already addressed. I hope people can understand that I've put a lot of hard work into the research and analysis of this video, so please drop a like if you can, and maybe stick around by subscribing. I hope to reach 1,000 subscribers soon, so let's try and make that happen.